hadn't heard from Amanda Greyson in over a year when the envelope slid through my mail slot. Heavy cream paper, gold embossed lettering. You are cordially invited. The words shimmered like they were better than me. I turned it over, in my hand, thinking back to when Amanda used to show up on my porch barefoot, mascara smudged, asking for advice and leftover lasagna. That was before she married her fourth husband. Before she moved up in the world. I sat down in my kitchen, with the invitation and my cup of chamomile tea, hands trembling just a little. The gala was for some foundation. She claimed to have started something about empowering women. Oh, the irony. I almost laughed. But then something in me stirred. A need to be seen. A need to remind her I hadn't faded into wallpaper just because. My husband had died and my son had moved to the other coast. I opened my closet and stared. Everything looked like it belonged to someone invisible, so I drove to the second-hand store near the edge of town, the one with the patient shopkeeper who always said, "Don't look at the price tag first, feel the fabric." I found a dress, there, deep navy with delicate beadwork, maybe from the 1940s. When I put it on, I saw a glimpse of the woman I used to be, proud, poised, not someone who disappeared when the young and flashy walked in at home. I pinned my husband's silver brooch to the shoulder, the last gift he gave me before the cancer ate him away. It sparkled just the right amount under the kitchen light. I was nervous, yes, but something inside me also felt ready. I arrived at the ballroom early. The valet looked confused, like I'd made a wrong turn into a world that didn't belong to me, but I smiled politely and handed him my keys. Inside, the room was gold and chandeliers. Too many people pretending they didn't know each other. Too many teeth. Too much perfume. I stood tall and walked across the floor like I had every right to be there. Then I saw Amanda. She stood at the center of a circle, surrounded by people I half recognized from magazines and gossip columns. Her dress was blood red and clung to her like she had something to prove. She caught sight of me, her eyes flicking over my dress, then settling on my brooch. She smiled, but it wasn't kind. "Oh, Margot," she said loudly, that smile growing. "You came, and you're wearing something." She gestured vaguely toward my dress. The people around her turned to look. Some whispered. One man chuckled behind his champagne glass. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I didn't move. My fingers grazed the brooch on my shoulder. Amanda tilted her head. "Is that from the attic?" "So delightfully antique." The people around her laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly, but enough. The kind of laughter that sticks in your ribs and rots you from the inside out. I stood there, forcing a smile, but I was dying inside. That dress had meant something to me. That brooch was my husband's, my past, my pride, and she'd just stripped it away in front of strangers. "Excuse me," I said softly, turning on my heel. I walked floated through the glittering room, heart pounding in my chest, eyes blurring with unshed tears. It wasn't just about the dress. It was about how she erased me, how she looked right through me like I was nothing, like I hadn't helped her pick herself up more times than I could count, like I didn't matter. I reached the coat check, hands fumbling. The young girl behind the desk looked startled when I snapped, "I'm leaving." Outside, the air hit my lungs like freedom. The streetlights flickered, and the night was colder than I expected. I pulled my shawl tight and stood there, shoes aching, pride bruised, and spirit barely standing. But I wasn't finished. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. There was one person I hadn't spoken to in years. Someone who owed me deeply. I found his number and dialed. He answered on the third ring. "Margot." His voice was hesitant, surprised. "I need a favor," I said. "Tonight, can you send the car?" There was a pause, then, "Absolutely. Give me 10 minutes." I hung up, heart racing with something new. Not shame, not sadness. Something hotter, sharper. 10 minutes later, a sleek black limo pulled to the curb. The valet's eyes nearly popped out of his skull. I walked past him like I'd never been hurt, never been laughed at, never been broken. I opened the door myself, slid into the plush leather, and watched through tinted windows as Amanda Greyson came out the ballroom doors just in time to see the car pull away. Her jaw dropped. That was just the beginning. I didn't go home that night. The limo took me to the Hotel Cordell, an old place with velvet chairs and creaky elevators, the kind of spot where no one asks questions and the walls carry secrets. I hadn't stayed there in decades, not since Gerald surprised me for our 30th. anniversary with champagne, and a night of dancing in the rooftop lounge. The same bellman, now older and slower, greeted me with, "Mrs. Langston." I nodded, and he smiled. "Welcome back." I stood in the elevator alone, watching my reflection in the mirrored walls. Amanda had seen an old woman in a thrift store dress, but that wasn't all I was. Not by a long shot. I thought about Amanda's rise, her designer shoes, the talk shows, the husbands she cycled through like dresses, but I also remembered when she was nothing, when she sobbed on my couch with bruises under her makeup, swearing she'd change her life. I helped her build her catering business. I loaned her money, $5,000, to be exact. She never paid it back, never even mentioned it. She used me like a ladder, and now that she was high up, she wanted to forget whose shoulders she'd stepped on. I poured a glass of sparkling water from the minibar and sat by the window, looking down at the city. That gala wasn't a celebration of women, it was a mirand. Amanda wanted everyone else to see themselves as smaller than her. Well, not this time. The next morning, I woke early and called Susan, my old friend from my days in real estate law. She now ran a woman-owned PR firm downtown and had a memory sharper than Amanda's heels. "Susan," I said, "how would you feel about a little truth campaign?" She laughed softly. "What kind of truth?" "The kind that clears a few old debts." I told her everything: the loan, the emotional manipulation, the fake smiles, the public humiliation. Susan's tone changed. "You know, I've got contacts at the Observer, and they're always looking for hypocrisy among the high and mighty." I smiled for the first time in hours. "Then maybe it's time." Amanda Greyson met karma with lipstick. Susan said she'd start working on something discreet, careful, nothing slanderous, just the truth. That night, I walked into my living room, took down the dusty old box labeled Amanda G., and began digging through years of receipts, letters, and emails. Wasn't out for blood, but I wasn't staying silent either. By the time Friday rolled around, Susan had drafted a quiet little piece titled, "Who Built Amanda Greyson?" It wasn't vicious, it was smart. A subtle weaving of timelines, facts, and overlooked contributors. My name was only mentioned once, in a brief paragraph that said I'd been an early supporter, an investor. But people noticed, especially the ones who knew Amanda from back when she couldn't pay her light bill. The article dropped online late in the day. Just before the gala weekend buzz began to fade, comments started to pour in. Some supportive, some shocked, a few angry ones calling the piece jealous nonsense, but others, others remembered. By Saturday night, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in years. "Margot," the voice said, "this is Kenny. I used to work Amanda's first food truck. I just read the article. You really were there from the start. She used to call you her guardian angel." Guardian angel, that stung. "She cut me off when I asked for health insurance," he added. "Said I was replaceable." I thanked him, heart heavy and strangely satisfied. For years, I'd buried those memories, convinced maybe I was exaggerating. But now, they were rising back like bones through thawed ground. I didn't want pity, I wanted peace, and a piece of myself back. That night, I stood in front of the mirror, again, same dress, same brooch. I brushed my silver hair smooth and even applied a little lipstick, coral pink. Gerald always said it made my eyes pop. I took a photo, just one dot, then I posted it to my old Facebook page, barely used, with the caption, "She laughed at my dress. But this dress saw me through storms, and storms always pass." Within an hour, friends I hadn't heard from in years were commenting, old clients, distant cousins, even Gerald's former secretary. And then, the message arrived. From Amanda herself. "Amanda Greyson, can we talk, please?" In private, I stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete it, to ignore her the way she'd ignored me when I needed kindness, but another part of me, well, I needed to hear what she had to say. I typed back, "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. my place, don't be late." I closed my laptop, folded my hands in my lap, and whispered, "Let's see who you really are." When no one's watching, Amanda arrived 5 minutes late. She pulled up in her luxury SUV, all gleaming chrome and designer tension. She wore oversized sunglasses and a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my mortgage back in the day. I stood at the door and watched her hesitate before ringing the bell. When I opened it, her smile was tight. "Nervous, "Hi, Margot," she said, like we were old friends meeting for tea, not enemies circling the same fire. I stepped aside. Come in. She walked into my living room like it was unfamiliar, like she hadn't once spent hours here crying into my throw pillows. Her eyes flicked to the pictures on the wall. Gerald, in his Navy uniform, my son's graduation photo, our old dog Buckles, memories Amanda had once shared in, now forgotten, now forgotten. I read the article, she said finally, perching on the edge of my sofa like it might bite her. It caught me off guard. I sat across from her, hands calm in my lap. Did it say anything untrue? She looked away. It's complicated. No, Amanda. It's simple. You used me. You laughed at me in public. And now the world remembers you didn't build your little empire alone. She sighed, the kind of sigh people make when they want sympathy. Margot, I was young. I made mistakes. I raised an eyebrow. You're not young anymore. What's your excuse now? She flinched. The room went quiet. A breeze shifted the lace curtain behind her, light dancing across her face. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said. I was trying to fit in. I let those words sit there, heavy and useless. I spent years helping you fit in, I said, and the minute you had a seat at the table, you pulled the chair out from under me. She opened her mouth, closed it again. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a check. Her fingers trembled just slightly. Here, it's the money you loaned me, adjusted for inflation. I looked at the check, then back at her. I don't want your money, I said. She looked confused, but I thought I wanted an apology. I said, not a transaction. Amanda lowered the check, her voice small now. I'm sorry, Margot, I truly am. I studied her face. It wasn't smug anymore. It wasn't polished. It was scared, cracked, human, but I'd waited too long for this moment to let it end here. You didn't just hurt me, I continued. You taught everyone around you that being cruel was fashionable, that climbing meant crushing, and for what? A seat at a table full of people who'd drop you the second your dress went out of style. Tears welled up in her eyes. For a split second, I saw the Amanda from long ago, the woman I once believed in. I missed having someone who saw the real me, she whispered. I sighed. Then you shouldn't have laughed when I walked in wearing it. She put the check back in her purse and stood. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to say something. Thank you for giving me the chance. I walked her to the door. No hugs, no tears, just silence between two people who once knew each other well, and now didn't know how to begin again. As she drove off, I stood there on the porch, arms crossed over my chest, wind pulling gently at my cardigan. I didn't feel triumphant, not yet, but I did feel whole. Inside, my phone buzzed again. Susan, the Observer wants a follow-up. They want to interview you. My stomach dropped. Me, on record. I'd spent years hiding in the background, being the helper, the quiet force, the forgotten name. And now, someone wanted to hear my story. I looked down at the brooch on my dress, still pinned there like a promise. Maybe it was time. Maybe I was done shrinking to make others comfortable. Maybe Amanda laughing at my dress was the best thing that ever happened to me. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about Amanda's face, the way her voice cracked when she said she missed being seen. It should have satisfied me. It didn't. I wasn't sure what I expected. Confession, regret, a breakdown. Maybe I wanted her to carry some of the weight I'd held for years. But then I thought about something else. Susan's message. A public interview. Not about Amanda. About me. I hadn't told my story out loud in a long time. Not since Gerald passed. I used to believe my life wasn't worth a headline. But maybe I was wrong. The next morning, I walked to the cafe on 8th Street and sat at the corner table by the window. I used to come here with my son before he moved away. Back when we still talked. I pulled out a notebook and started writing. I wrote about my early years, how I built my own business while raising a child and taking care of a sick husband. How I mentored women like Amanda because I believed in lifting others, not stepping on them. I wrote about the loneliness of widowhood, the ache of watching others forget you existed. And I wrote about the night she laughed at my dress. Tears filled my eyes, but I didn't stop. The pen kept moving, as if my hands had waited decades for this moment. Later that day, I met with a reporter from the Observer. Her name was Claire, young, bright-eyed, wearing a turtleneck and carrying a laptop far too thin for comfort. But she looked at me with respect and pity. I read your post, she said, and the piece Susan published. I'd like to know more about you. Not Amanda. I blinked. Why? Because you're what people don't see, and that's the part that matters most. So I told her everything. Not to get even, but to get free. The article dropped the following week. It was titled, "The Woman Behind the Women, Margot Langston's Quiet Legacy." I read it 3 times. Every word felt like a mirror, honest, kind, and unflinching. It talked about my years in community development, the programs I helped fund, the women I mentored, and how one moment at a fancy gala had awakened something I didn't even know I'd buried. People started reaching out. Women from the past, neighbors I hadn't seen in years, even former clients. "You were the first person to believe in me," one wrote. "I still remember the advice you gave me in 1997. Another said, "You changed my life." I cried that night, not because I was sad, but because I realized I hadn't disappeared. I'd just been quiet. The attention didn't make me feel powerful, it made me feel seen. After so many years of fading behind louder voices, I was finally stepping forward, and then came the strangest message of all, from my son. "Mom, I read the article. I'm sorry I haven't called in a while. Can we talk?" That one hit the hardest. We hadn't spoken in months, not since the argument about my staying in that old house instead of moving into a facility. He thought I couldn't manage alone. He didn't see that independence wasn't about being young, it was about being whole. I stared at his message, heart pounding. Slowly, I typed, "Yes, I'd like that." The next morning, he called. We talked for nearly an hour. About nothing and everything. About Dad. About the past. About how proud he was of me, how ashamed he was for doubting me. "I just didn't know what you were going through," he said. "I didn't know how strong you still are." I smiled. "Well, you do now." That night, I looked in the mirror again. Same eyes, same silver hair, same brooch, but this time, I didn't see someone who had been laughed at. I saw someone who finally laughed last. I never planned to be the center of anything. Most of my life was spent making sure others had the spotlight, smoothing the wrinkles in their stories, while ignoring the creases in mine. But after the article, everything shifted. Women started stopping me in the grocery store. One hugged me outside the post office. Another dropped a letter in my mailbox, no return address. Just 5 pages about her own pain, and how reading my words helped her stand a little taller. And then came the invitation. It wasn't from Amanda this time. It was from a nonprofit downtown that supported older women re-entering the workforce. They wanted me to speak. Me, Margot Langston, a woman Amanda had laughed at in front of a ballroom full of strangers. I said yes before I even had time to be scared. The event was small, nothing fancy, folding chairs and cold coffee. But the faces that looked back at me, some wrinkled, some tired, some filled with tears, made my knees tremble. I stood behind the podium and cleared my throat. I was laughed at for wearing a dress that held memories. I began, but that moment wasn't my end, it was my beginning. I spoke for 10 minutes, not long, but long enough for the air to shift. When I stepped off the stage, people clapped, not politely, but with the kind of energy that said, "We hear you, we've been you." I walked to my car afterward, shoes aching, but heart lighter than it had been in years. I was halfway home when I passed the billboard. There she was, Amanda Greyson, smiling in pearls, promoting her new lifestyle brand, Elegance, with empathy. I almost laughed out loud. Empathy, but I didn't feel bitter. Not anymore. I pulled over and just stared at her face, wondering if she saw me now as anything more than a shadow from her past. Or maybe, just maybe, she'd finally learned something. A week later, I found another message in my inbox. "Amanda, saw the photos from your talk. I'm glad you're finding your voice." I meant what I said. "I'm sorry, it wasn't much, but it was something." I didn't reply. Not out of spite, but because I didn't need to. I had spoken my truth, that was enough. The next day I walked into the same second-hand store where I bought the dress. The owner greeted me with a wide smile. "You've been in the paper," she said. "People keep asking about that navy dress." I chuckled. "It still fits." I ran my hand across a rack of silk blouses, letting the fabric speak to me again, not because I needed to prove anything, but because I wanted to celebrate. The party had laughed at my dress, but that dress reminded me who I was. And now, when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see someone overlooked. I saw a woman who came back, louder, stronger, and far more elegant than any ballroom could handle. It had been almost a month since Amanda laughed at my dress. In those weeks, my life had changed more than in the 10 years before. I was writing again, speaking, being invited to events not as someone's plus one, but as someone people actually wanted to hear from. But the real surprise came one Sunday morning, wrapped in the smell of fresh cinnamon rolls, and the knock on my front door. I opened it, and there stood my son. Daniel looked older than I remembered. His beard was fuller, his eyes softer, and in his arms was a bouquet of sunflowers, my favorite. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Mom," he said. I didn't speak. I just pulled him into my arms, squeezing tighter than I should have. We sat in the kitchen over coffee, steam rising between us like a bridge. "I should have never pushed you to leave this house," he said quietly. "I thought I was protecting you, but I was trying to fit you into a story you didn't write." I nodded slowly, my throat thick. "I'm not helpless, Daniel. I'm not finished." He smiled. "I know that now." We talked for hours, laughed about old memories, even cried a little. For the first time in years, he saw me not just as his mother, but as a whole woman with a past, a voice, and a fire that hadn't gone out. Before he left, he touched the brooch on my dress and said, "Dad would be proud." I watched him drive away and realized something I hadn't before. This wasn't just a story of being laughed at, it was a story of being remembered. A few days later, I received an invitation I never expected. It was from the same gala committee that hosted Amanda's event. Apparently, after the article, several members started asking questions, whispers about her foundation's finances, about who really helped her start, about who she forgot once the cameras showed up. Now they wanted me to speak at the next event, not as Amanda's plus one, not as a guest to be mocked, but as a keynote speaker. I stared at the invitation for a long time. Part of me didn't want to go back into that ballroom. Part of me remembered the laughter, the sting of shame, but another part of me bolder, clearer knew that sometimes healing means walking back into the room with your head high. I called Susan. "They've invited me to speak," I said. She laughed. "I know. I may have pushed that along. You little puppet master," I teased. "So, you going?" I took a breath. "Yes, I think I am." When the night came, I didn't wear the navy dress. Instead, I wore a deep emerald gown I found at the same thrift store. It shimmered under the lights like leaves after rain. I pinned the brooch to my collar, kissed Gerald's photo on the mantel, and whispered, "This time, I walk in proud." The limo came again, but this time, it wasn't an act of revenge. It was a celebration. When I walked through those ballroom doors, heads turned, not because I was loud, but because I was seen, and Amanda, she was there, tucked into a corner, watching me take the stage she used to own. But I didn't look at her. I looked ahead, and I spoke like a woman who had nothing left to prove. The spotlight didn't scare me this time. I stood at the podium, heart steady, gaze firm. All the glitter in the ballroom faded into the background. What mattered were the women watching me, some young, some old, all waiting for something real. I leaned into the microphone and began. I was laughed at once. Not for my words, not for my actions, for my dress. A dress stitched with memories, grief, love, and pride. The room hushed. I wore that dress the night my husband proposed. I wore it when I held my son after his first heartbreak. I wore it when I stood in the mirror alone for the first time after losing the man who built a life with me. It was never just a dress. I paused and scanned the audience. It took me 68 years to learn that when someone laughs at you, it usually says more about them than it does about you. Soft murmurs, a few nods, when someone tells you you're outdated, irrelevant, too quiet, too soft. Let them, and then rise anyway. The applause wasn't wild. It was steady, heartfelt. I stepped away from the mic, not waiting for a standing ovation. That wasn't why I came. I sat down at my table, and that's when I saw her. Amanda. She was watching me with an unreadable expression, her makeup perfect, her dress expensive, but something in her eyes had cracked. She stood slowly and began to make her way toward me. For a brief moment, I thought she might turn around, but she didn't. Amanda walked up to my table and stood beside me. Everyone pretended not to look, but the air changed. Even the waiters froze. "Margot," she said, voice lower than before. "That was, powerful." I nodded. "Thank you." She hesitated. Her hands clutched her clutch too tightly. "You were right about me. I wanted the world to clap for me so badly. I forgot to clap for the people who held me up." I looked at her, really looked. She didn't seem smaller, but she no longer towered. "I used to admire you," she whispered. "And when I saw you, At the gala in that dress, I felt ashamed of how far I'd drifted from who I once was. So I made a joke. It wasn't about you. It was about me. That stopped me. I believed her. But that didn't erase what happened. You could have pulled me aside, I said. Apologized in private. You didn't. You waited until everyone saw the damage. I know, she said, and I don't expect to be forgiven. Good, I said gently. Because this isn't about forgiveness. It's about ownership. She lowered her gaze. I hope someday I can do something right. I stood, faced her, and offered my hand. You just did. We shook hands. No cameras. No audience. Just two women who had finally said what needed saying. As Amanda turned and walked away, something in me let go. Not bitterness, not pride, just weight. I felt lighter than I had in years. When I returned home that night, I took off the emerald gown and laid it carefully in my closet, beside the navy dress. Both had served their purpose. One carried my pain, the other, my power. And now, I carried neither, only myself. Spring came slowly that year. The trees outside my kitchen window bloomed with soft pink petals. And every morning, I made coffee and sat at the table watching the light shift across the floor. Life hadn't returned to normal, it had grown into something better. I had speaking invitations pinned to my fridge, letters tucked in a shoebox from women all over the country who read my story and saw themselves in it. But I didn't take every offer. I chose carefully. I was done being everywhere for everyone. Even Daniel had changed. He visited more often now, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with just stories from his day. He no longer tried to fix me or suggest condos near his home. He just listened. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was being heard. One afternoon, he helped me clear out the attic. We found old dresses, dusty books, even a box filled with Gerald's handwritten letters. Daniel read a few aloud, then looked at me with tears in his eyes. You kept all of this. Of course, I said, gently. It's part of who I am. He nodded. I didn't understand you for a long time, but I think I'm starting to. Later, after he left, I sat in the attic alone, running my hand over the fabric of that navy dress. I hadn't worn it since the night of the gala, and I didn't need to anymore. It had already done what it came to do. I placed it in a clean garment bag, zipped it closed, and wrote a small note. To the woman who needs this next wear it with pride. Then I drove back to the thrift store, handed it to the owner, and smiled. Weeks passed, and the world moved on. Amanda rebranded her foundation, this time with real collaboration. And from what I heard, she was working to make things right behind the scenes. We didn't become friends again, but there was peace between us. Sometimes, that's more powerful than a second chance. I no longer needed to watch her fall. I'd already risen. One morning, I walked through the park near my house and saw a woman sitting on a bench, head bowed, clutching a paper bag in her lap. She looked about my age, maybe older. Her shoes were worn, her coat thin. I sat beside her and offered a quiet, beautiful morning. She nodded, not looking at me. Something in her tight, guarded reminded me of myself. I didn't press her for conversation. I just sat there, silent and still. Before I left, I reached into my purse and pulled out the last letter I had written but never sent. It was titled, For the Woman Who Was Laughed At. I left it beside her, stood, and walked away. Behind me, I heard the sound of paper unfolding. That night, I made myself tea, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and opened my notebook to a new page. At the top I wrote, Chapter 1. I thought my story was over. Then I smiled, because I knew now that as long as I had a voice, as long as I had a heart still beating with purpose, there would always be another chapter to write. No ballroom, no dress, no cruel laugh would ever define me. Again. I was Margot Langston, and I had only just begun.